Invincible Superman Zambot 3 is an anime that, if you're into mecha, you're likely to have at least heard of even if you haven't watched it. It's an early work by many of the writers and artists who go on to make the revolutionary for the industry Mobile Suit Gundam. It has been called darker or edgier super robot show or a deconstruction of the genre, which are terms I will not utter past this point. 1977 was a vintage year for heavier material, both in animation and comics. In the West, Ralph Bakshi would release Wizards, which is basically an 80-minute version of that one House of Decline Steven Universe vs. Hitler comic. It's tremendous. This was also the year Mitsuteru Yokoyama released Mars. Mars is a manga that follows the rough plot of the 1951 American science fiction movie The Day the Earth Stood Still. Both stories feature an alien invader who has to decide whether the people of Earth can be trusted to expand into space or if humans' warlike nature means that they must be culled for the sake of universal harmony. While the American film ends ambiguously with a possible salvation so long as humans forswear all aggression, Yokoyama's Mars has no ambiguity. In response to witnessing the horrors of mankind's warlike nature, the alien visitor condemns the planet to destruction. The manga also introduces Mr. Alberto, who would become a fan-favorite character in the 90s OVA Giant Robo, subtitled The Day the Earth Stood Still. Setting heaviness aside for the moment, 1977 was also the peak of the super robot craze. And when something reaches a peak, that means that something has begun to decline. Dynamic Productions, which had been king of the genre for years, would briefly leave television after a contentious legal dispute with Toei regarding the show Daiku Maru Gaiking. Shows from other studios, such as Toei Animation's Bear Attack, Wako Productions' Mikanda Robo, or Nippon Animation and Ashi Productions' So Bad You Can't Even Laugh at It Gingeyser, failed to find success. The airwaves and marketplace were oversaturated with giant robots and their heroic pilots, but some shows still found success. One was Toei Animation's Planetary Robo Danguard Ace, credited to Leiji Matsumoto. Leiji Matsumoto was not a fan of the super robots, and he would have the show buried after it aired, but Danguard Ace was a success and by most accounts it was quite good. Still, it would be greatly overshadowed by his later works such as Captain Harlock and Galaxy Express 999. Other successes were the super robot shows created by Sunrise. While Voltus 5 didn't match the success of the previous year's smash hit Combattler V, it was still very profitable. Sunrise had proven themselves to be a company whose super robot shows would sell toys. To better capitalize on that, Sunrise began efforts to grow a roster of original intellectual property. Their first effort would become Invincible Superman Zambot 3. Initial production began while Voltus 5 was airing, and several of its staff were reassigned to this new project. Sunrise approached toy maker Clover to make merchandise to accompany this new show. It was titled Zambot 3 because it was the first Sunrise robot, and because it is the sum of 3 robots. Additionally, there exists a comically large type of anti-cavalry sword called a Zambato, which roughly translates to horse cleaver. This super robot is better than even that, so instead of being a Zambato, it's a Zambot 3. Because this was Sunrise's first original property, Zambot 3 was treated as something of an experiment. The show was meant to air only for a short period of time, no need to commit to a long project if it might be a bust. Its chief director Yoshiyuki Tomino would later remark that even its abbreviated episode count was perhaps still too long. And indeed, while Zambot 3 concluded its story in only 22 episodes, it had one additional episode appended in the middle after Sunrise received a late order for more episodes. The show was a success. Somewhat humorously, Clover lost the toy molds in Europe, so the original Zambot 3 toys are quite rare despite selling well. But while Zambot 3 is well remembered, it's not because of the toys. Let me bring up the content warning page again because this video will get heavy at points. Children die. Adults die. The dog dies. This is the Super Robot Show with the human bombs. It's going to be a lot. The show starts by showing a gang of middle school boys recklessly palling around on motorbikes. One of the boys is Kozuki Shingo, seemingly the oldest and tallest, as well as the leader of the gang. Another boy is Kappei Jin, the smallest of the group. Their rambunctious and ludicrously dangerous play is interrupted by the cops. As everyone splits, the cops focus entirely on catching Capet. They don't like his family, eccentric but well-to-do fishing fleet owners who are preoccupied with a treasure hunt. Supposedly, Capet's ancestors buried something important in Tsuruga Bay. Capet meets up with Kozuki again on a small local island. They have a friendly match of throw anchors at each other. Capet is being cheered on by Aki and Michi, two girls he jokingly refers to as the ugly pair. Once again, they're interrupted, this time by some kind of gigantic mechanical sea creature. Kozuki, his gang, and Aki and Michi all jointly flee to the shore, but Capet insists on instead heading to his family's platform on the water, from which they were hunting for treasure. He finds it abandoned. As the monster closes in, he is rescued by a gigantic ship which rises from beneath the waves. A door opens in the hull of the ship and bids him to recite the trading manual, Chapter 31, Part 2. To Capet's surprise, he recalled this passage. It's instructions on how to safely board the ship in front of him. He does as he's told and finds his mother, older brother, grandmother, and grandfather already aboard. They strip him down, dress him up in a pilot's uniform, and shove him and his dog into a giant flying craft, the Zambot, to fight the monster. You always said you wanted to fly a fighter jet, his grandpa tells him over the comms. Capet is informed that he has been trained in his sleep to operate the machine. The Zambot and the larger ship, the Beale First, were, of course, the lost treasure his family had been looking for. Grandpa informs Capet that a great evil has come to Earth, necessitating the reclamation of these ancient machines. The monster that attacked them earlier, and which is even now threatening his friends, is but one such foe. Capet makes a few flyby attacks on the Mecha Boost, the name this series gives to its enemy robots, before performing an ace change to transform the Zambot into the humaniform Zambo Ace and engage it on land. Things look rough for Capet until he's able to locate and attack the Mecha Boost's weak point. As an aside, there are several sequences which seem to anticipate later video game tropes. Besides the whole having to hit the weak point, there's also a scene where Grandpa gives Capet instructions that sound exactly like dialogue from a tutorial level. With the Mecha Boost defeated, the next episode picks up with Capet obediently using the Zambo Ace to carry his family's belongings to the Beale First. They'll be living there until the invaders are defeated. The cops again show up to hassle them. They get second thoughts when they see how gigantic the Beale First actually is, but still ask to see proof of ownership. Capet rightfully doesn't care about any of that and leaves to go show off his robot to Aki and Michi. They go on a joyride. Elsewhere, the wider Jin family, which includes the Kami family and the Kamikata family, dredge up their share of the ancestral inheritance, the Beale Second and its Zambol, and the Beale Third and its Zambase. The Zambol and Zambase are piloted by Capet's cousins, Uchuda Kami and Keiko Kamikata, respectively. They join the fight even as more Mecha Boosts begin to appear and cause trouble. Additionally, the Beale First's computer reveals that all three machines can combine into a single robot. Grandpa wonders why none of the technical documents made any mention of this fact before Grandma responds that, of course, the robots can combine. Their ancestors don't need to waste ink on something obvious to everyone. None of the kids are eager to try combining, but the situation is forced upon them after the Zambol and Zambase get pinned down under an enemy heat beam. Capet is unwilling and unable to initiate the combination, however, being overwhelmed by the pressure of combat. In response, his older brother Ichitaro cuts Capet's controls, leaving him helpless in the face of Mecha Boost's attacks. Our family doesn't need someone who can't cooperate. Besides, we have no place on this earth if we can't fight. Very well chastened, Capet manages the combination. The completed Zambot 3 capably defeats the Mecha Boost. When asked how the team felt about their first combination, Uchuda answers that, to be honest, he's not so happy about it. This will be the mood of the show going forward. Zambot 3 is very character and very family focused. Capet gets most of the screen time as the lead and primary viewpoint character, but besides him we have Chiyo Nishiki, his loyal dog, Aki and Michi, Kozuki and Kozuki's gang, all of whom remain prominent characters throughout. We also have Capet's large extended family, the Jin, the Kamis, and the Kamikatas, collectively the Jin family. Ichitaro Jin is Capet's older brother who handles technical matters. Hanae Jin is his strict but loving mother. Ume Jin is his absent-minded grandmother who is, secretly, the best character in the show. and Hazeman Jin is family patriarch and de facto leader. Uchuta Kami pilots the Zambot. He's slightly more mature than Kappei, but only just. His relationship with his parents, Daira and Sumi Kami, is rough. He gets along much better with his younger brother and sister, Kazuyuki and Kiro. Keiko Kamikata pilots the Zam Base. She's the least rambunctious of the Zambot 3 pilots. She's big into horses. Her father's name is never given, but her mother is Yumiko Kamikata. Keiko has a younger sister, Kimiko. Learning everyone's name and precisely how they relate is kind of tricky because the viewpoint characters are the young pilots. They only refer to the adults as Grandma or Uchuta's mom or the like. To catch one of the adults' names, you need to wait until the adults are speaking with one another alone, which is rare. This also means that you mostly don't find out which of the adults were born to the family and which have married into it. We know Hanae Jin, Kappei's mother, married in, but she's the only one where we know for certain. Given that the various giant machines are ancestral Jin family treasures, it's interesting that the show doesn't call attention to this. Just as the Jin family proper control the Beal first, the Kami control the Beal second, and the Kamikatas control Beal third. Each ship had previously been buried under some body of water. The Beal II was under Tokyo Bay, for example. It has since been recovered. Of course, they also link together to form a singular battleship, the King Beal. As much as Zambot 3 is very recognizably a super robot show, it has some distinctions from its peers. Most super robot shows, especially in the 70s, are rigid in more ways than one. The character designs are realistic, or maybe more accurately, the designs tend against being cartoony. Characters move stiffly without much squash and/or stretch. There's very little exaggeration. The faces are detailed, often stern. There's a heavy Gekiga influence, which is especially apparent in the sketchy style predominant in the dynamic production shows, but it's present throughout. This rigidity is also evident with the robots. Super robots tend to dogmatically follow the restrictions of their toys, even at the cost of having the various combinations and transformations look awkward. The Getter Robo shows are a notable omission. Their combinations were charmingly goofy, but they were impossible to translate back into a toy. The industry saw that as a mistake and took pains to avoid it in future shows. Exceptions to this rigidity were carved out for comic relief characters, such as Boss from Mazinger Z, the Junkyard Kids from Yusha Raiden, or the Cooks family from Combattler V. Voltus 5 doesn't have any of that because it was a serious show for serious adults. Zambot 3 is far less restrained. There are background gags hidden throughout. The characters look like cartoons. They're animated like cartoons. Any given character might be drawn in any of a dozen different art styles, depending on what kind of mood or punchline the show is trying for at any given time. It mostly works. The wacky animation plays into the humor quite well. Even the robots are expressive. I love the Zambo Ace in particular, whose goofy face and subtle proportions are positively goblin-esque. And speaking of robots, in most super robot shows, the heroic robot is armed with any number of near-magical powers and unlikely devices. Most of them can strike a pose and fire some type of beam or ray. Several weaponize some sort of toy, such as a yo-yo or playing card. Or if they have a more probable weapon, it'll still be somehow fantastic, such as an ogre's axe or a chivalrous knight's sword. The Zambo Ace has a piece. The combined Zambot 3 is a little more typical, but while it does have a host of weird attacks, it predominantly relies on only two. It has its daggers, which can combine into a spear or a sword, and it has throwing stars, which can fire their points out as tiny missiles. Besides those, the only weapon you regularly see is its moon attack finisher, and even that isn't used every episode. For being a giant robot samurai bedecked in bright primary colors, it's rather restrained, at least by comparison to its contemporaries. Other weapons, such as the Zambird's weird radar dish, its bird gun, or the Zambot 3's rocket punch, show up maybe once or twice across the whole series. This is a strong contrast against other super robot shows, Mazinger Z and Combattler V and such, which exhaustively exhibit their arsenals. Another difference is with the basic situation. Positively without exception, earlier Super Robot shows were stationed at a singular base which the robot defended from enemy attack. In Mazinger Z, this was the Photon Laboratory. In Great Mazinger, this was the Fortress of Science. Raideen defended Metropolis, Combattler V, the Nambara Connection. The analog to this in Zambot 3 is, depending on the episode, either the Beale First ship or the combined King Beale. Neither of these have the barrier that defends the base in other shows. Neither of these are staffed by crews of soldiers or scientists, it's just the Jin family themselves. And there's no mad scientist running things, you just have Grandpa. Being mobile ships, the locations change from episode to episode, and you can actually track the Jin family's movement north across the island of Honshu towards Hokkaido as they pursue the Gaizok, this show's evil aliens, from episode to episode. And they do actively pursue the Gaizok. They don't wait for the Gaizok to come attack them, which is necessary because, by and large, the Gaizok don't do that. The Gaizok have their own mission, and the Jin family and their spaceship and their super robot aren't relevant to that mission, except to the extent that they interfere with it. One last thing to say about the King Beale and its component craft is that, in my opinion, they look kind of lame. They're very boxy, very polygonal. They're spaceships you might build in Minecraft. This is especially apparent when you compare it with the Solar Bird from Voltus 5, which was also produced by Sunrise in the same year. It's more detailed, it has more curves, more color. Why is there so much discrepancy between two robot shows produced at the same time by the same studio? Because Zambot 3 was produced on a budget. One of the stories told about Sunrise's later production, Mobile Suit Gundam, is how its animation director, Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, was diagnosed with pleurisy and had to be hospitalized. The animation director's job is to double-check the keyframes. They make certain that everything looks the way it's meant to and that different illustrations are in agreement with one another. Following Yasuhiko's absence, the consistency of the animation on Gundam noticeably dropped. Zambot 3, in comparison, never had an animation director to begin with. You can tell. There's a lot of funky animation. There's a lot of limited animation. The Zambo Ace's initial transformation has some questionable proportions. Instead of becoming a reoccurring stock sequence, as is typical, this early animation was replaced entirely by Episode 3. There's more than one sequence where the hero robot just tweens across the frame. The fight choreography is mostly bad, which, not to put too fine a point on it, is a really unfortunate flaw for a super robot show to have. The show's animation of characters comes across a little better, if only because its comic approach is more forgiving. Even so, it's not too hard to find scenes where the characters are off-model. There are moments where the characters wear the wrong uniform. There's a humorous scene where Kappei's dog Chiyo Nishiki is shown with some screws loose. Chiyo Nishiki is not a robot dog. Yoshinori Kaneda, who animated that frame, also worked on another show which did have a robot dog and seems to have made a false assumption about the poor pupper. It's not just the animation, the backgrounds in Zambot 3 are simpler than the backgrounds of Voltus 5. The Voltus 5's backgrounds are very detailed and very colorful, Zambot 3's are fine, but not quite great. There's a perception, not wholly false, that in the 70s, Japanese animation had yet to reach its height. As such, when watching old shows, it can be easy to excuse limited animation as being just how it was. But some shows, including Voltus 5, truly do hold up quite well. In the NHK documentary Making Gundam the Inside Story, Yasuhiko Yoshihazu says, all of Sunrise was poor. At the time, the main powerhouse of Sunrise was Tadao Nagahama's team. And that's where the subcontracted work for Toei's Voltus 5 went. You have to give your best for outsourced work. Originals, on the other hand, stay underfunded. Don't ask me why. The Japanese Wikipedia on Zambot 3 also quotes Tomino questioning why Sunrise wouldn't commit its full resources behind its own original work. He specifically laments the show not being assigned an animation director. This isn't to say that Zambot 3 has no good animation. There is some gorgeous animation, especially in the final episodes. But the median level of quality doesn't quite maintain that height. On a lighter note, the music is absolutely phenomenal. Watanabe Takio and Yuji Matsuyama provided the soundtrack. They previously worked together on Bajoku Megu-chan and Rascal the Raccoon, and, like more than a few names on the show, would further secure their fame with their later work on Mobile Suit Gundam. Zambot 3's soundtrack is the very model of a late 70s anime soundtrack. Very jazzy, a little disco, with an absolutely eclectic variety of instruments. Take the track played right now as an example. It leads in with a piano, then brings in horns over a funky bass line before bringing in a theremin and transitioning into a flute solo. Other tracks use marimba, bongos, and some mighty percussions. The soundtrack also heavily uses synths, although not to the degree that we'd see in the 80s. Now, this is my humble opinion, but I don't think any Super Robot show up until then has had quite as strong a soundtrack as Zambot 3. There are contenders for opening and closing theme songs, but not for the cartoon itself.
私たちは地球人だ。ただ私たちの先祖が他の星から来たということは間違いないがな。
本当かよ。そりゃ知らなかった。
ああ、そうだって。あんた一太郎から聞いていたんだろうにさ。
そりゃ聞いていたらしいけども。
In episode 4, Grandpa lays things out. In a distant star, far from our sun, lies the planet Beale. At one time, Beale was populated by a scientifically advanced alien species who lived peacefully without conflict. This left them unprepared when the Gaizok attacked them. The Gaizok waged a war of elimination. With their technology, some of the Beale people were able to escape on large spaceships. These survivors scattered across the cosmos, with the Jin family's ancestors landing on Earth and Japan during the Edo period. The Beale diaspora built the Zambot 3 as a countermeasure against a potential future attack from the Gaizok. If you want a textual explanation for why the Zambot 3 alien war machine looks like a samurai, there you go. If you want an explanation for why the Gaizok's mothership, the Bandok, looks like a Shikoki Dogu statue, I've got nothing. The Gaizok mostly consist of little green men, with designs that pull from the same comic sensibility that produced Looney Tunes' Gremlin, Marvin the Martian, and the Flintstones' Grey Gazoo. Their officers include Gizzard, Beretta, and Sabuta, who is named after a Mongol general. The Gaizok don't seem to be all one species. A surgical doctor in a later episode resembles the Gamalas from Space Battleship Yamato, for example, and the Gaizok as a whole are led by Killer the Butcher, who is unlike any of the others. Killer's name and design are a cross between real-life humans Abdullah the Butcher and Killer Moto, both of whom worked in Japan as heel wrestlers at the time. Killer Moto may be better known as Torquemada in the West. In contrast to their ominous names, the show is at its most cartoonish with the Gaizok. They have a lot of personality, with the smaller aliens showing an absurd deference towards Butcher, and Butcher himself showing a childlike interest in Earth culture. There's a lot of physical humor. The Gaizok employ a wide variety of mecha boosts, giant zoomorphic war machines. These are purpose-built within the Bandok mothership before being sent out to cause havoc. The show isn't strict about just having one enemy robot per week. When the Jin family start making some headway against the Gaizok, they're willing to send out as many mecha boosts as it takes to protect themselves. That being said, the Gaizok are slow to recognize the Jin family as a threat. In a reversal from the typical Super Robot show setup, it's the Gaizok mothership, the Bandok, which is protected by a nigh invulnerable barrier. The Bandok is a giant ship which is itself a giant robot, making it an unlikely precursor to all the heroic carrier battleship spaceships that transform into giant robots that would come later. It's also something of a bad guy analog to both the King Beale and the Zambot 3. This is surprisingly uncommon in Super Robot shows of this time. You'd think having an overarching big bad guy robot to hype up as a threat would be a no-brainer, but having enemy robots that survive for multiple episodes wasn't normally a thing at this time. The Gaizok are here to kill absolutely everyone on planet Earth. This isn't a land grab, a resettlement, or any kind of colonization effort. The reason why isn't clear at the start, but they are here for the purpose of killing everyone. Unfortunately, no one besides the Jin family is quick to believe this. When Kappei receives the Zambo Ace, he shows it off to his friends Aki and Michi before taking them for a ride. Trouble happens as Kappei is called on to investigate a possible Gaizok incursion with the girls still on board. They get caught up in a battle, but they make it out okay. A handful of episodes later, after the Gaizok begins his attack on Japan in full force, Aki and Michi and their families are forced to abandon their homes as the city is evacuated. When Kappei takes the Zambot Ace to check up on his rival Kozuki, he finds his rival's house mostly collapsed and Kozuki's younger sister in peril. While Kozuki's sister becomes enamored with Kappei for rescuing her, Kozuki asserts that Kappei's family's war machines are what endangered them in the first place. The episode ends with his family driving away from the ruins to join a refugee march. In a later episode, Kozuki will be separated from his family as the refugee train grows and becomes less organized. This does not improve his opinion of Kappei. Kappei, being a rambunctious and excitable 12-year-old, is unequipped to handle the politics of his position. When he's sent to deliver supplies to a refugee ship as a goodwill measure, he's met with an unwelcome reception. When he looks to his friends for support, he's unprepared for them to dismiss him. We understand Kappei's feelings perfectly. From our perspective as the audience, we know that the refugee's blame is misplaced and that Kappei is genuinely doing his best to help. But he's still a child and a war robot, and we're shown his tantrum from the ground level. Zambot Ace, the brightly colored hero super robot, comes across as a monster. It's terrifying. This is not something that just comes up as a gag in 1 or 2 episodes. The public's antipathy and at least understandable paranoia towards the Jin family is constant throughout a large part of the show. When Gengoro Jin, Kappei's father, returns home with his fishing fleet, he finds himself a target of opportunity for a Gaizak Mecha Boost. When Kappei rescues his father and some of the sailors mistake the Zambot Ace as the aggressor. Gengoro's insistence that this is not the case is met with not so much anger as bafflement. While the Zambol and the Zambase mecha engage the Mecha Boost, Kappei releases the rescued crew at a nearby port. The townsfolk react violently against Gengoro and Kappei. Seeing Gengoro in the hands of the robot confirms their fears that the Jin family and the invading aliens are connected. They attack, they club Kappei, and they tie up Gengoro as a hostage. They kick the dog. Kozuki's arrival does not calm things. Kappei accuses him of turning the townsfolk against him, but Kozuki calmly replies that everyone came to their conclusions on their own. The townsfolk scheme to ransom Gengoro for an assurance from the Jin family that they'll leave the country, but this plan falls through when the Mecha Boost rampage finally reaches the town. As it happens, this is an episode with a pretty high death toll. Everyone has scattered but Kozuki, who's determined to hold Gengoro responsible even as the monster approaches. Gengoro, an adult and a father, simply talks to the kid. As Kozuki unties the ropes, he tells the older man how he was separated from his parents and his sister. The sad music plays. At the end of the episode, Gengoro is finally reunited with his family aboard the King Beale. When Kappei talks about how he resents Kozuki for turning on him, his father slaps him. It doesn't matter what other people think. They're the only ones who can protect the people of Japan.
でもよ父ちゃん、俺光月が父ちゃんをあんな目に遭わしたことが嫌なんだよ。半年も漁に出ててやっと帰ってきてくれた父ちゃんなんだよ。それを光月のやつ、父ちゃんを縛り付け、父ちゃんをいじめ。俺だって一生懸命メガブーストと戦ってるんだ。ザンボットの運転は難しいんだよ。俺は毎日ろくに寝ないで覚えたりしてんのに、光月のやつは俺のそんな苦労ちっとも知らないで。
そういうことはこの父ちゃんにはちゃんと分かってる。それでは嫌か、カッペイ。
Kappei is a brat. The show doesn't exactly make it hard to dislike him. Watching him mess things up and cause problems, it's easy to think, someone should set this kid straight. This episode does exactly that when the townsfolk physically assault the kid, his dog, and his father. It's as if the episode is saying, this is what you wanted, right? The show moves on. Next episode, the Gaizak's Mecha Boosts reach Yokkaichi, where several refugees had relocated, including Aki and Michi. Fearing the worst, Kappei visits them after one such attack only to find both girls had lost their homes for the second time, and Michi has been injured. Kappei arranges to have Michi brought aboard the King Beale to be treated by Uchuda's father, a doctor. Aki decides not to accompany Michi. She's instead trying to locate her parents and Michi's parents, who they were separated from during the last attack. Moreover, she's not happy with Kappei's attitude. You seem to think it's cool to fly around in that robot, but the only thing we can do is run away from these air attacks. Actually, I don't want Michi to go to your ship, but I guess there's no choice. In light of the continued attacks, Kozuki has second thoughts about releasing Kappei's father. When he happens to run into Aki and learn that Michi is aboard the King Beale, he assumes the worst and takes his gang, all likewise refugees, and motorboats to the King Beale. They get the jump on Keiko with a rifle and leverage her to enter the ship. They wreck some control panels and then head to the infirmary where they plan to rescue Michi. Michi, for her part, is quite happy with her treatment and isn't thrilled to be taken away. When Mama Hanai intervenes, Kozuki pulls the trigger.
こうちゃん撃ったね私を
さっきから言ってんじゃん動いたら撃つって言ってたろおばさん撃つぞ撃っちゃうぞ
Miraculously, and in no small part due to Hanai, things work out without anyone being hurt. Kozuki is a very scared kid who doesn't understand things. Without his family, there's no one to stop him from acting on his fear. This isn't really anyone's fault, it's just a sad outcome of the situation. And, of course, it goes without saying that scared little kids shouldn't have guns. The damage Kozuki and his gang did to the King Beale looks superficial, but we're told that it's extensive. In the following episodes, the ship will be disassembled into its component craft, and each of the families will take charge of repairing their own. While this is going on, the complete Zambot 3 will dock at the Beale first, which will take charge of countering the Gaizok. The Gaizok's rampant destruction continues to escalate, and it becomes clear to everyone that their attacks are truly indiscriminate. From here on out, the show eases off from so intensely highlighting the resentment towards the Jin family. The people who held the strongest animosity were shown to be those who were already familiar with them. For example, the police who had been hassling the family since before the Gaizok attacked, or the port town folk who recognized the Jin family as being owners of a fishing fleet. But the people in these towns are now completely scattered. The fighting has encompassed a wide enough area that a larger portion of the affected population lack the preconceptions needed to personally resent the Jin family, and they only know of them as the people fighting the Gaizok. Even the government acknowledges the Jin family after they step in to rescue the deputy prime minister. Throughout all this, the Gaizok pay only minor attention to the Jin family. When they park their band dock on the wreckage of Tokyo, they're even content to let the Zambot 3 fruitlessly test its barrier. A lot of early anime, by which I mean the shows from the 60s and 70s, played fast and loose with tone. Even so, these early episodes of Zambot 3 are notably very comfortable playing with tone. To look just at other robot shows by Sunrise, Voltus 5 was very straightforward and po-faced all the way through, sometimes to its detriment. Combattler V was lighthearted and even somewhat camp. The first half of the show did have a whole high drama among the villains, with Mia's unrequited love toward Garuda, Garuda's rivalry and one-sided sexual tension with Yoma, and the false Shakespearean tragedies all the villains kill each other. But even then, the joke was that the actual heroes, the people the show was actually about, were blissfully unaware of any of that. Yusha Writing's first half is maybe the closest in comparison to Zambot 3. It was also a show with some heavy tonal whiplash, with comedy character Raiso mistaking his mother's evident death only for it to be played at his expense, joke monster Gonger given inexplicable pathos, and even its hero Akira falling into despair at several points. Both it and Zambot 3 share the same chief director, Yoshiyuki Tomino, as it turns out. But while similar, the tonal play in Zambot 3 feels more conscious. Its greater continuity smooths over some of the abruptness present in earlier shows. Not every problem needs to be resolved at the end of every episode, and that means that the sad things are allowed to stay sad for longer. Or to put it another way, not every character has the good manners to die after all the pathos has been wrung out of them. Bad things happen to Aki, Michi, and Kozuki, but then they continue to be part of the narrative. The whiplash more often comes from moments of levity. The show has sight gags and a good amount of character humor. It has Grandma Ume, and she rules. Remember when I said the Jin family rescued the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan? She led the effort because the Deputy PM was her ex-boyfriend. Watching Kappei struggle to keep her safe while she goes Rambo rescuing him was great. The show has jokes. But then again, some of that humor is the Looney Toony antics of Killer the Butcher and his minions Gizzard and Beretta. You know, the people murdering everyone. The jokes are funny, but watch out. Zambot 3 is not atypical in how it handles tone, at least as an anime of its time, but it's very deft in how it does so. It comes across as very deliberate, which is not always the case with its contemporaries. Over the course of some episodes, the Gaizak destroy Tokyo. They then land their mothership, the Bandok, among the ruins. Its barrier repels even Zambot 3's strongest attacks. The King Beel's ion cannon might be able to penetrate the barrier, but the weapon is unusable while the ship is disassembled into its individual craft. The adults do notice a weakness. The barrier does not penetrate below the earth or between the buildings it's nestled against. They form a plan. Dad and Grandpa will sneak through the barrier, break into the Bandok, and then locate and deactivate its barrier. Afterwards, the Zambot 3 will be free to attack it. The plan works flawlessly. Kepei suggests a further course of action. Turn the barrier back on after the Zambot 3 gets through to prevent pursuit. Some intervening plot happens, but Kepei does eventually attack the Bandok with his robot. He does a good amount of damage just marching around inside. Killer the Butcher ultimately gets the intruders to leave by having Mechaboost attack the Beel first. As the Zambot 3 leaves to defend the ship, the Bandok flees. Because of the attack on the Bandok, Killer the Butcher is ordered to report to Gaizak, the being which is Gaizak. It inhabits the inner chambers of the Bandok like some terrifying god, and guides the Gaizak forces on their genocidal mission to, as it describes it, restore order in the entire galaxy. It berates Killer the Butcher for its negligence in this task, and using the immortal body bestowed upon him and the weapons granted to him for simple gratification, and for allowing the Holy Bandok to suffer damage, Killer the Butcher is commanded to step up his game. The Jin family's attack has done considerable damage to the Bandok. They came damn close to defeating it outright. This could have been the end of the story. If they had attacked the Bandok in full strength from the get-out, or if they had been willing to forsake the Beel first to keep up the attack, who knows? Here's a spoiler for the end of the show. The Bandok does not have a second form. There is no final boss transformation. To paraphrase modern-day strategist Day 9, they could have just gone over there and killed the Gaizak. The show never presents evidence otherwise. Keep that in mind during these later episodes. The middle third of the show slips into an uneasy melancholy. An Achuda-focused episode sees his mother suffer a nervous breakdown from having her family constantly be in the center of the conflict. She pressures her husband to return back to their home, the one building still standing in their neighborhood in Tokyo. It's a very uncomfortable episode, where we are shown from Uchuda's perspective how much stress the conflict puts on his family. When a Mechaboost attack finally destroys his home, it almost comes as a relief. In a later episode, Kepei chances upon Kozuki and his gang again. Kozuki has chilled tremendously and is now leading a caravan of refugees away from the conflict. Among the refugees is Chieko, a young girl of Kozuki's sister's age, who lost her parents in the conflict. Kozuki is watching out for her until the caravan passes near her relative's home. Kozuki has relaxed, but Kepei is having a hard time. The constant fighting is getting to him, and seeing Chieko react poorly to his robot is enough to trigger his own breakdown. Kozuki tells him that while it's understandable that Chieko is frightened, her trauma doesn't change the situation. Only the Jin family can fight against the Gaizak. If I were you, I would fight on until I die. Kepei recovers his resolve and returns to the battle. Kozuki tells Chieko, "See, what a nice guy. He's going to fly that good robot to beat the bad robot." It may be the best line of the show. Kepei's later reunion with Aki and Michi is less serendipitous. Kepei has been actively taking note of the refugee travel paths in hopes of meeting up with his friends again. As it happens, they've been placed in a refugee camp outside of Hakodate City in Hokkaido, where they live in a subsection of a Quonset hut. Aki's mother has just been let out of the hospital, and Aki holds some resentment towards Kepei and his family for her mother's injury. A Mechaboost's rampage comes close to the refugee camp, but Aki's family isn't able to evacuate due to her mother's injury. When the Jin family offers aid, they're angrily rebuffed until finally the mother insists they put their anger behind them and accept help. After the fighting has concluded, Aki is still unwilling to face Kappei. However, at the end of the episode, she asks Michi to present him with a scarf scaled to the Zambot ace she sewed from scrap cloth. Kappei gratefully thanks Aki. Michi, seeing Kappei look straight past her to Aki, says to herself, "I'm miserable." Her heartbreak lasts only a moment, before fading back into joy and excitement. After that, we have an interstitial episode before the show moves on to its final arcs. The UN requests that the Jin family and their war machines join their defense force in an operation against the Gaizak. Kappei is angry to have the Zambot 3 benched as the Defense Force Navy leads the fight. After it's revealed that Admiral James rose through the ranks in peacetime and his only combat experience was a total defeat, Kappei wonders if the whole effort is just the Admiral throwing away the lives of his men in a vain attempt at glory. Disgusted at this perceived cowardice, Kappei confronts the Admiral only to learn that, in fact, the entire battle is a feint to draw the Gaizak's attention away from a resupply fleet delivering needed materials to the Jin family. Yes, the fleet and its crew are being sent to die, but not for the Admiral's personal glory, but to rearm and reassemble the King Beale, which the UN recognizes as the planet's best chance to defeat the Gaizak. This in no way assuages Kappei, and while the mission is a complete success, he remains horrified that Admiral James was willing to go through with it. This whole run of episodes can be characterized by expressing a sense of exhaustion. There are moments of joy and moments of triumph, but all of that is hard fought. The Jin family is winning, but painfully, slowly. But also, the Gaizak know that they are losing. Killer the Butcher realizes he needs to change tactics. Common fan misunderstanding from those who have heard of the show but haven't watched it is that Zambot 3 has the episode where a child explodes. That's not quite correct. First, it's not just the one episode, but a 4-episode long story arc, and secondly, it's more than one child. The first episode of the Human Bomb arc leans into the whole tonal whiplash thing by being very goofy. The younger cousins, feeling like they're not contributing enough to the war effort, secretly commandeer a submarine and go wandering the sea looking for the enemy. They do come across a patrol, but the enemy commander in charge recognizes the tiny craft as belonging to the Jin family. He disguises himself as a human to gain the children's trust and captures them. The actual human bomb portions of the episode almost seem besides the point. We're introduced to the concept at the start with the gruesome reveal that Killer the Butcher has resorted to it as a form of attack which evades easy reprisal. However, most of the episode is about Kappei's efforts to rescue his younger cousins and how his angry impulsiveness has begun to mature into a more commendable determination.
よく言ったカッペイ。
お前3人を助け出す自信はあるかい？自信ってそんなものをでもやらなくちゃいけないんだ。さすが我が孫じゃ。ええ男じゃの。
It would almost be a charming and funny episode if it weren't for the whole civilians being set up as unwitting suicide bombers thing, and even that is played for some humor. The Gaizak battleship is destroyed when a Mook accidentally presses the blow the civilians up button while the civilians are still locked in their brig. Is it too much to play something that bloody for a laugh? Well, don't worry. It's about to get much less funny. The next episode takes place in a Gaizak prison disguised as a refugee camp, where the refugees have bombs implanted into them surreptitiously before they're released back into the general populace. Among the captured are Kozuki's gang, who straight away realize that something is up. Kenta, one of the gang, manages to escape and then makes the long trek to contact the Jin family. After being filled in on the situation, the family plans to infiltrate the camp in preparation for breaking the prisoners out. Such an important role can only be left to the most competent people available, Kappei and Grandma Ume. They introduce themselves as helpless refugees to disguised Gaizak guards and are promptly captured. While Grandma does grandma things, Kappei rendezvous with Kozuki and his gang. It comes up that some of the prisoners have been taken away at night, although those taken don't remember this. They return with star-shaped bruises which are just prominent enough for the viewers at home to notice, but not so prominent the characters themselves have paid attention to them. Kappei realizes what's going on. These two boys are already dead. Finally, the raid on the camp begins. Grandma leads the prisoners to safety while Kappei joins his cousins to pilot the Zambot 3. The Gaizok respond with an absolutely buck-wild mecha boost armed with long vacuum arms that it uses to suck up the fleeing prisoners. While they nab a few, this backfires after the recaptured prisoners begin to explode. This is the second time in as many episodes that the whole human bomb thing has backfired on the Gaizok. The day is saved, such that it is. Many of the prisoners have been rescued, this one prison camp is emptied, and the Gaizok were driven off. But what is to be done with the prisoners who have bombs? Because this is a new tactic, none of the Jin family's ancestral records offer any help. With the fuse uncertain, the prisoners inspect themselves for the operational bruise, and then the star marked set themselves apart and wait. The next episode is titled Aki and Capet. How do I even start to talk about Aki and Capet? Killer the Butcher's next plan is to release a large number of prisoners on a disabled passenger ship placed in the direct path of the King Beale. Grandpa and most of the rest of the family are immediately suspicious and radio for help rather than take any of them aboard. Capet doesn't get this message and is already returning with one of the refugees, Aki. Aki and Capet speak with one another openly for the first time since episode 8. They've both become a little more mature. Her parents are conspicuously not present, but rather than thoughtlessly ask a question which only has one possible answer, Capet instead offers her a place on his family's ship. They're cute together. If you're watching Zambot 3 in the 2020s, or even back in the aughts, which is when I first saw it, then you know what's coming next. It may be the reason you've heard of the show in the first place. Zambot 3 is infamous for killing this girl, for killing Aki. And man, it sucks. It's effective. It's damn effective, but damn. In the early years of the English language mecha fandom, you'd occasionally hear someone say something like, "Would you believe that, before Gundam, its animators made a show where a young girl explodes?" That's about how this show was discussed. Its infamy in its home country, as I understand it, is much the same. Imagine what it would have been like to have watched this episode back in the day. What would it have been like to have seen it as a child when it first aired? Now, I know I'm already talking about a cartoon from 1977, but permit me to turn the clock back a few more years. When Mazinger Z, often considered the first of the Super Robot shows, was 2/3 through its original run, it released an episode, The Fateful Robot Rhine X's Song. Rhine X has Mazinger Z's protagonist's little brother Shiro meet up with a girl his own age who's being pursued by the bad guys. This girl is Lorelei, daughter to Dr. Stroheim, a mad scientist who fled from the series' big bad guy Dr. Hell so he could build his own ultimate creation in secret. Without getting deep into the complex and intricate lore of Mazinger Z, Lorelei is revealed to be a robot. She transfers her consciousness to a second, more giant robot, and then fights against Mazinger Z. Mazinger Z defends itself, Lorelei dies, and then the younger brother cries at her death. I doubt it's the first example of introducing and then killing a young girl for pathos in anime, but it's certainly the first to do so in a super robot show. I can't guess if other animators thought it was bold and daring or if it was just in bad taste or whatever, but they likely noticed the sky didn't fall. The sad, dead little girl would become a genre cliché. It happens twice just within Sunrise's own Combattler V. Once with Powerpuff predecessor Cosmo Bird, and again with Super Maria. Children dying was acceptable. A lot of traumatic things were acceptable. Combattler V and Voltus 5 both have explicit and explicitly violent slavery. Outside of Sunrise, we have protagonist Musashi, kamikazing in the final episode of Getter Robo, and the dynamic production shows are full of minor miseries, as was Yusha Raiden. This isn't even the first time we've seen human bombs, with this poor mind-controlled sap willingly disposing himself in episode 8 of Combattler. It's actually something I appreciate about kids' anime from this era. Its cavalier willingness to portray awful things happening. But Zambot 3 is often the show that gets brought up when discussing the surprising and the outrageous in 70s anime. What makes this cartoon different from the other cartoons? Part of this is because of Mobile Suit Gundam. Have you heard of that show? It's pretty good. It started a franchise, something uncommon with super robot shows of this era. Gundam shares much of the same staff as Zambot 3, and as Gundam became popular, the earlier show was re-examined as the work that laid some of its conceptual groundwork. I'll touch more on this later. This in turn meant that Zambot 3 would be watched in a different context than many of the other Super Robot shows. But another reason is that Zambot 3 treats Aki's death much more seriously than earlier shows. Is her death cheap pathos? Arguably. I do have issues with it, but it's on another level than, say, Super Maria's death in Combattler. It's not just a cavalier willingness to parade tragedy. It's a direct and logical continuation of the show's previous explorations of the trauma of war. Kozuki gets separated from his family and stays separated. Aki and Michi lose their homes multiple times, and now their families are conspicuously absent. Kappei lost his home, his hometown, and endures the hatred of his countrymen as he fights on their behalf. This is all to say that Zambot 3 doesn't just have one very special episode about something terrible. The misery in Zambot 3 is constant. Even the coming next episode segment concludes with Grandpa asking the audience, well, how are they going to fight through this? So, Aki's death. What can be said about it? What do we think about it? It does work for me. It works because it's placed within a story in which, yes, something like this could happen. It's a story in which such things have already happened. But another thing that helps it is how her death isn't just an exclamation. It's an important part of the story, but it's not the whole story by itself. The story goes on, the episode goes on. We were just at the commercial break. The Gaizok take the explosion within King Bill as an opportunity to attack. This backfires when their mecha boost is swiftly defeated and the King Bill traces its trajectory backwards. The Gaizok have revealed their position. With their various prison camps destroyed, the Bandok now houses the remaining captured human prisoners and the remaining human bomb implant facility. Kozuki, who was recaptured by the vacuum mecha boost in the previous episode, is among the prisoners kept here. With him is Michi. Kozuki, who once staged an assault on the King Bill and who led a convoy of refugees across Honshu, is precisely the kind of person who could do some damage in this position. As the Bandok take measures to defend itself from an approaching Zambot 3, he is given the opportunity to stage an escape. He leads Michi to an escape pod before returning to do more damage. Gaizok, the evil god that commands Butcher, tires of hiding and orders Butcher to assault the King Bill directly. Kozuki is able to flee and rally the remaining prisoners. When the Bandok briefly lands on solid ground, they take the opportunity to escape. They are aided by some prisoners using a radio device to purposefully and constructively self-detonate. Forced into a poor position by the threat of the King Bill's ion cannon, the Zambot 3 is able to overcome the Bandok's protective barrier. The Bandok is once again forced to flee, leaving its prisoners behind. The Jin family have the Gaizok on the ropes. These episodes, while tense as hell throughout, make time for gags. We see this baddie hold up a humorous sign as the Zambot attacks. Michi and Chiani Shiki share a broken heart as they witness the Bandok rise out of the ocean. We see Kozuki bounce off the barrier from the inside. When Gizzard objects to launching a mecha boost to fight the Zambot 3 on the basis that they've already done so once this episode, Butcher responds that today they're having a bargain sale. Hold up. What show am I watching again? Zambot 3 has jokes? Are you sure? Are you telling me that the child exploding cartoon is funny? Welcome to anime from the 70s. Ain't it something? The King Bill is in pursuit of the fleeing Bandok, but they have time before they catch up to them. Kozuki helps the Jin family draft battle plans using what he learned aboard the Bandok. The family enjoy a meal. Grandpa and Grandma share a moment. The Gaizok are less calm. Defense planning gets heated. Given how every mecha boost so far has been defeated, they decide on a ship-to-ship engagement. They launch a barrage of missiles. The King Bill returns fire. The battle is on. What's there to say about this episode? The big ships shoot at each other. Eventually the King Bill and the Bandok trade hits with their main cannons, disabling both armaments. With the batteries offline, Killer the Butcher decides to simply ram the smaller craft. Because of the distances involved, the King Beale has some time to react. To defend the larger part of the ship, Grandpa plans to disconnect the Beale second and intercept the Bandock. Grandma, catching on, goes with him. Grandpa makes a crude joke about the two of them coming together as the sad music plays. The battle lulls as the Bandock and what's left of the King Beale drift apart, each taking stock of their damage. Capet's father declares that they'll press the attack again as soon as they resupply. What follows from this, and the start of the second to last episode, is maybe the dumbest moment of the show. Since this is going to be the final battle and everyone present is risking their lives, the fathers and the kid pilots tranquilize the women and the children, and Kozuki put their sleeping bodies in escape pods and launched those pods back to Earth. And, there's a lot I could talk about here if I wanted to, but frankly, this is all too ridiculous for me to bother. The 8-year-olds probably shouldn't be on the ship, sure. Maybe they could have been dropped off back while the ship was still on Earth, but fine, okay, sure, we can do it this way instead. Alright. The Gaizok continue to have a rough time. The Bandock's god thing tells Killer the Butcher that failure at this point will cost him his life, and Butcher is quick to pass the message down the line. Again, without doing a play-by-play, the major beats are Capet's father, Gengoro, attaches the Beale third and uses it to kamikaze 2 final mecha boosts, saving an imperiled Zambot 3. Killer the Butcher detaches the Bandock's head and uses it to engage the King Beale, or really just the Beale first ship at this point. The Beale first detaches its ion cannon, which is inoperable without the other 2 craft, and the Zambot 3 connects it to its own engine to fire it. By the way, this shot of Zambot 3 firing the ion cannon is one of the best and most recognized pieces of animation from this show. It's quite striking, with the wires and tubes connecting everything, and the dials and controls of machinery shown as these brightly colored simple shapes standing out from their darker surroundings. The angles and perspectives skew playfully, and the color fades away when the cannon finally fires. It's good stuff. After the blast, there's nothing left but Killer the Butcher himself. He knows he's lost, he is prepared to die, but he has one question. Why fight against him? The Jin family had a spaceship. They could have just left the Earth the way their ancestors left planet Beale. Why risk their lives in this battle? Capet is just confused. Of course they defended their planet. Why wouldn't they? Butcher taunts that no one back on Earth appreciates their sacrifice, but this seems not even false so much as besides the point. What are you even getting at? Butcher's cyborg body explodes. The relief at victory is cut short as the Bandock's headless form drifts back into view. 2 episodes ago, Grandpa and Grandma died. Last episode, Capet's father died. Let's go into this final episode with appropriate expectations. The Bandock seems to shift the Zambot 3 and the Beale first into separate dimensions filled with gigantic, terrifying monsters. This is an illusion. Our heroes are being tricked into firing on each other. Uchuta realizes this after the Beale First's attack riddles his cockpit with shrapnel and the pain returns him to his senses. With the illusion broken, the Zambot engages the Bandock, which is still heavily damaged from their earlier bouts. They trade haymakers. Uchuta's injuries get the better of him, and he can no longer help operate the Zambot. They attempt to decombine, but while Capet can remove his Zambo Ace, the Zambase and Zambol remain fused together. Uchuta and Keiko decide to overload the Zambol's ion engine, while the Zambase rockets them both into the Bandock. Capet, now alone, enters what remains of the Bandock and eventually stumbles into the abode of its god. It speaks to him. I am defeated, Capet. Only now do we finally learn the reasoning behind the Gaizok's actions. Firstly, this being is not actually the Gaizok in totality, but rather is Computer Doll Number 8. Gaizok is the name of the planet whose people constructed it. Computer Doll Number 8 was built to react against evil minds and enforce peace throughout outer space. Does its current actions mean that it considers everyone on Earth to be evil? Well, as it diplomatically explains, humans certainly can't be considered a good life form. Number 8 informs Capet that its systems are too damaged for it to self-repair. It is dying. Capet and his family have won. But it still has one question it wants to ask. And listen, Butcher may have already asked something similar, but he'd appreciate it if Capet really gave this some thought. Why did you fight when you could have just left? Did you do it because the people of Earth asked you? Did you choose to fight for your own sake? Were you somehow forced into this? Why persist after so many of your friends and family died in the effort? Who will thank you? Do you think anyone on Earth has enough kindness to be grateful? You've won, Capet Jin, but after you've sacrificed so much, after so many of your friends and family have died, there will still be no one on your Earth who will welcome you. Hey, let me make an aside, talk about Combattler V for a moment. That's another show which had a late reveal that the villain was a computer and that there were no real flesh and blood antagonists. It's a concept that I really like, and one of the more straightforward science fiction ideas present in some early Super Robot cartoons. I find something deeply chilling about this concept of a sort of mechanical opponent, an enemy that doesn't even hate you, but simply targets you as the result of some cold equation. The inhabitants of Zambot 3's planet Gaizak almost certainly aren't aware of Earth. Computer doll number 8 mentions lying motionless for hundreds of years between destroying planets. How long do we suppose it's been functional? Do the inhabitants of planet Gaizak even exist anymore? Now, Combattler V sadly ruins its suspense by continuing for another 28 episodes after its reveal, but Zambot 3 ends here. No further answers are forthcoming. Computer doll number 8 dies. The Bandok mothership, now lifeless and inanimate, tumbles towards Earth with Capet still inside. Ichitaro and Uchida and Keiko's fathers maneuver the Beale first onto the Bandok to arrest its fall. It costs them their lives, but the effort pays off. Capet is able to escape. One of the wildest facts about Zambot 3 is that its final episode aired on the same day as Voltes 5's final episode, March 25th, 1978. You could have watched Capet's extended family all die at 5:30, and then change the channel at 6 to watch Kenichi and his brothers topple the monarchy and reunite with their father. It was a Saturday. Kids these days are missing out. The Japanese Wikipedia page for Zambot 3 quotes the series' chief director, Yoshiyuki Tomino, as saying that after the final episode aired, the production, sponsors, and advertising agencies all turned blue. The toy sold well, and the Clover Toy Company will continue sponsoring future shows. There are things I like about Zambot 3's ending, and things I don't. I love how the King Beale and the Zambot 3 come apart in the end, how the combining gimmick is reversed. It's a simple thing, but it's an effective visual that plays with the toy part of the cartoon without being obtrusive. I like the way Grandpa and Grandma go out together. If you're going to have the heroes kamikaze the bad guys in your children's cartoon, well, this was a lovely way to do it. The whole thing where they tranquilize the women, the children, and Kozuki is dumb. The show tries to milk it for some drama, too. The bad guys target their pods as they fall to Earth and, oh no, however will the heroes protect them? It's dumb. I could go into depth, but I will restrain myself. It's dumb. I do like how Uchida dies. He not only gets got by his own family, but he hangs on for a while. You know the poor kid is dead 6 minutes into the episode, but he keeps fighting on for another 5. It's horrifying, but understated, and it avoids being gruesome. I don't like that he decides to crash into the Bandok, and I super don't like that Keiko gets dragged along with him. I don't like that the dog dies. It happens in a blink and you'll miss it scene, which I did blink and miss the first time I saw the show. So that was a fun surprise on my rewatch. It feels weird to complain about the dog, given that this is the children blowing up cartoon, but it feels maybe more excessive. Why didn't they put the dog in a pod too? I like how Capet's older brother and uncles saved his life. That's a change in opinion from when I first watched the show. Back then I thought the effort was too reckless and, unstrategic. Now that I'm older, I get it. Much of this goes back to what I said earlier about how Super Robot shows handle tragedy and trauma. All of this is ground earlier cartoons covered, but Zambot 3 is a hell of a lot more real about it. It almost feels like it's calling those older shows out. One of Killer the Butcher's namesakes, Killer Moto, was infamous for rubbing salt in his opponent's eyes. Zambot 3 can feel similar. It's a very affecting show, but maybe it's too manipulative, too mean. It's a show that rubs salt in. And speaking of Killer the Butcher's namesakes, now might be a good time to mention a fun fact about Chief Director Yoshiyuki Tomino. His work on Zambot 3 led to him being given a nickname by the show's fans, Minagoroshi no Tomino. In the Western fandom, this has been commonly translated as Kill 'em all Tomino, but another translation might be Tomino's the Butcher. Later shows by Zambot 3's crew tackle many of the same heavy topics, but with more grace, usually. But there's something fascinating about how it's done here, with how raw and heavy-handed it is. Later shows more clearly aim at an older demographic. Zambot 3 has the audaciousness to present itself as a kid's cartoon. That in itself is enough to give everything a more vicious bite.
Kappeiはここに戻ってくるって思ってた。
お前カペイのこと好きなんだろ？
私ブスだから。
いいじゃねえか。俺だって好きなんだ。こいつに惚れてんだ。
Michi and Kozuki find Kappei, catatonic but alive, on a beach near Suruga Bay. And fuck me if this isn't a great moment. Soon a crowd appears. Everyone has come to welcome Kappei. And then they play the end of episode theme. But instead of the lyrics being about how you can never come home again, it's a new verse about how there's no more fighting, and how freeing that is. And how pleasant it is to have friends, and how wonderful it is to love and be loved by those around you. It's a very welcome bit of aftercare after what a beating the rest of the episode has been. it's a very, and then everyone clapped kind of an ending. But what can I say? I'm a mark. Let me take a moment to ground myself and my perspective. I'm writing the script for this video essay in 2023. I first watched fansubs for Zambot 3 in around 08, and it was a known quote-unquote important anime back when I got into the mecha fandom around 02, 03? For my personal perspective as not just a fan of the anime mecha genre or the super robot genre, but specifically the retro super robot genre, Zambot 3 holds a certain esteem. It's a complicated show with a lot of meat on its proverbial bones, but one that does this while staying firmly within the tenets of the genre. There's the one big heroic robot. There are transformation and combination gimmicks. The machines operate outside of conventionally understood science. The heroes work apart from the military for the most part. The conflict is cosmic in scale. The bad guys are monsters. The good guys unambiguously win. Later anime, even later super robot shows, will be far more flexible with these conventions. And that's without even mentioning the outgrowth of the real robot genre which dominated the 80s. This leaves Zambot 3 in the odd position of being unorthodox when viewed from both directions in time. It's far more daring than any of the kids' toy commercial shows that came before it, but it is still a kids' show rather than one of the many young adult war dramas with merchandising that come soon afterwards. It's a truly strange animal in a way that makes it fun to poke at. There's not much like it. It's also just regular interesting as a story. Like, here's something the show does that I haven't seen anyone else bring up. It does things twice. When everyone loses their homes, it's mostly played off as unimportant. Then Aki and Michi lose their homes a second time, and Aki really makes it clear how much it sucks for them. Grandpa and Grandma kamikaze themselves, and we get a sweet moment out of it, astonishingly. Then the next episode, Kappei's father does the same, and it's horrifying. First, we have a light-hearted, comic episode about human bombs where all the children get rescued. Then we have the other episodes. First, we have Killer the Butcher call out Kappei's motives only for things to fall flat. Who cares what the evil cyborg says? Then we have computer doll number 8 ask the same questions, and now they hit home. Kozuki escapes from being imprisoned twice. Kozuki even invades the King Bell with a shotgun twice. I didn't bother mentioning the first time because nothing really comes of it, but it happens. Maybe it's a twist on first as a tragedy, second as a farce, I don't know. But once you catch on that it's a thing the show is doing, you start looking out for it. It's neat, I like it. Another fun thing with Zambot 3 is how it references old American science fiction movies. The most obvious reference is to the 1953 Cold War paranoia picture Invaders from Mars. This movie has people clandestinely captured by Martians and given a radio transmitter implemented in the back of their necks. This lets the Martians alter their behavior and control their actions. You can tell who's been compromised because the procedure leaves a very particular mark on the back of their neck. The movie shows the procedure, Zambot 3 mirrors it precisely. By the by, Invaders from Mars also has a young neighborhood girl who dies tragically. Another clear influence is 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still. Within the shared logic of these two texts, Klaatu, The Day the Earth Stood Still's kindly alien protagonist, is analogous to the Gazak. Like, straight up. He goes around warning people if they don't play nice their planet will be destroyed. Gort, his killer robot escort, might as well be one of the Gazak's computer dolls. Let me quote Klaatu's speech from the film. "We have an organization for the mutual protection of all planets and for the complete elimination of aggression. The test for any such higher authority is, of course, the police force that supports it. For our policemen, we created a race of robots. Their function is to patrol the planets in spaceships like this one and preserve the peace. In matters of aggression, we have given them absolute power over us. This power cannot be revoked. At the first sign of violence, they act automatically against the aggressor. The penalty for provoking their action is too terrible to risk. If you threaten to extend your violence, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder." This is the same explanation computer doll number 8 gives for its actions. It was created to react against evil minds, to cleanse those who disturb peace in space, and responds to provocation, as it sees it, with total elimination. A penalty too terrible to risk and which will certainly halt aggression. The Day the Earth Stood Still is itself a deeply interesting film to revisit. While it's mostly remembered by American science fiction fans as a liberal anti-war film, there's a lot about its ideology worth interrogating, not the least its fantasy of a universal police force without mercy. Quoting Klaatu again, "We do not pretend to have achieved perfection, but we do have a system, and it works." Holy shit, fella, I don't know about that. By the by, this is the same film which inspired Mitsuteru Yokoyama's pessimistic manga, Mars. The writers at Sunrise were the only folks in Japan who took umbrage with the film's message. I gotta give a shout out to Ian Carsia for the episode he did on The Day the Earth Stood Still for his now concluded podcast, Monster Craze Memoirs. Zambot 3 has a higher number of female characters than any previous Super Robot show, and for the most part, they're all fully realized and important to the story. Ume and Hanae, Grandma and Mama Jin, are both tough, active, resourceful, and heroic. Sumie, Uchuda's mother, is a complicated and tragic figure whose failings are understandable and human. Aki and Michi, Kimiko and Kiro. This is a show where the women are full, complex characters. It took the better part of a decade, but we finally got that in a Super Robot show. And then there's Keiko. Keiko is done dirty. It feels like the show is afraid of portraying her as anything less than perfect. She doesn't have Kappei's rebellious streak, Uchuda's attitude, or really anything. She's obedient and pliant, and while you can read those characteristics as a response to shouldering so much responsibility at so young an age, it often doesn't come across. Consider episode 12, it's Keiko's birthday. Kappei and Uchuda bully her in a successful attempt to send her crying back to her mother. This is a scheme to trick Keiko into seeing her mother on her birthday since they know she's too diligent to leave her post otherwise. The plan backfires on the boys, although they never realize it, because Keiko's mother refuses to meet with her under these circumstances. Kimiko, Keiko's younger sister, reports that their mother doesn't want to see a coward. "I sent Keiko away as a soldier. I can't meet with her just because she's in pain." Intertwined with this is a rehash of Kappei's story, where Keiko is rejected by her friends for being a member of the Jin family. All is resolved by her stoically performing as a soldier, winning back the trust of her friends and the respect of her mother. The problem is that she began the episode as a stoic soldier. She had to be coerced into abandoning her post. And because her character faults are not her own, she doesn't overcome anything. She has no development. Even when there is an episode about her, it's about how she's acted upon. All of this comes to a head in her final moment on the show, where she dies riding the literal coattails of another character's heroic sacrifice. Zambot 3 is not a perfect show, but many of its flaws are inherent to what it is and what story it's telling. Keiko's treatment, by contrast, is disappointingly unforced. At least, Grandma Ume kicks ass the whole way through. Zambot 3 does not bat 1,000. There are bad episodes. There's the Keiko episode. There's an episode about a rich steel owner learning not to be prejudiced while the Jin family debate just robbing him for a shipment of steel ingots they need. But for the most part, these are just regular bad episodes. They've got problems, but they're sensible problems, normal problems. Then there is episode 20, which is both much worse than any of the other bad episodes and also bad in a more interesting way. Zambot 3 is 23 episodes long, but episode 20 was produced last. Sunrise got a late order for one more episode, and it was just sort of slotted in. In this exciting episode, the Prime Minister of Japan requests that the Jin family hand over the King Bill and the Zambot 3 to the International Defense Force. The Defense Force then crews the craft with adult soldiers. They fight and lose against 4 mecha boosts, returning from previous episodes, before Kappei and company get back in the saddle and handle things. So, the episode is about watching the robot being piloted by people who aren't characters in the show, jobbing against reused footage from older episodes. The beam quality for the combat animation already isn't that high, and being pieced together from segments that weren't intended to mesh doesn't do it any favors. All in all, it looks astonishingly bad. But what's really wild is the implications for suggesting the Jin family could have just turned things over to the military. Was that an option the whole time? Do you mean to tell me the 12-year-old didn't need to go through all this trauma? Zambot 3 plays up the Jin family's discrimination for being, effectively, financially successful immigrants. Papa Jin runs a fishing fleet, Papa Kami is a doctor, the Kamikatas have a horse ranch. The police are harassing them even before the Gaizak invade. You get a sense that the adults, at least, have a bit of embarrassment at their wealth, which helps fuel their obligation to use their otherworldly material inheritance to defend the planet. Zambot 3 also plays the conceits of super robot shows seriously. Children or teenagers piloting war machines is part of the genre, and the show plays these conventions straight to explore the logical consequences of such. Once you say, hey, why not let the government militia handle things, both of those things collapse. But this episode's dialogue goes weirder than just that. Grandpa gives a reason exactly why Kappei and his cousins make better pilots than the adult soldiers, and the answer is wild. First, they've been trained as fighters through sleep learning, to the deepest depths of their minds. They were hypnotized to be fearless in combat. Further, for the Zambot 3 to properly read its pilot's reflexes, those pilots need to be young children. The machine textually requires traumatized children to operate at full capacity. Why was it built like that? Or to move this question outside the diegesis, why bring this lore into the story? There's no answer to be found here, although later anime would run with this concept. You see it all over the Gundam franchise, Ideon has it, there's at least one mecha show from the 90s of minor consequence that has it, and it's by no means limited to robot shows. Anyways, episode 20 is bad, and introduces this weird, awful, Omeless deal to no real benefit. And let me tell you, Oomfies, when it comes to weird, awful, Omeless deals, just walk away. Oh, and we're also told that the blueprints for the King Bill and the Zambot 3 were handed over to the military. That feels like it ought to have some repercussions. One of the low-key funniest stories in the 70s and 80s anime production and merchandising is the completely cursed relationship between Sunrise and Clover. Sunrise wanted sponsors to pay for original programming which they could maintain the rights of, and Clover was a small toy company that wanted toy commercial cartoons to promote its products. This looked like a marriage made in heaven, but the problem was the children's toy market was about to undergo a sea change. Zambot 3 was a success. Were the advertisers happy with everyone dying? The toy sold, so the funding continued. The next cartoon by the staff, which would continue to be led by Chief Director Yoshiyuki Tomino, was 1978's Daitarn 3. In that show, well-dressed, ambiguously young playboy Haran Banjo lives in a giant mansion with his 2 girlfriends, a butler, and an orphan kid he lets hang around. He funds his lifestyle with the massive amount of gold bullion he stole, and also fights against evil cyborg meganoids with his giant robot, which he also stole. He also has a transforming jet plane car and a ton of wild James Bond gadgets. It's kind of like if Big O was less Art Deco and more shag carpet. As you might guess, it goes for a different tone than Zambot 3, but it's still a blast and is probably the better produced show. It also had a small budget compared to Sunrise's main studio, but its animators had become more accustomed to working within it. After that, they made Mobile Suit Gundam, which, well, it was one of the most important shows for anime as a medium. Getting into that would be entirely beyond the scope of this essay. Clover wasn't too thrilled with it because they felt it didn't do enough to promote its toys. Which is hilarious. Everything about Clover is hilarious. After Gundam came Space Runaway Ideon, which was also an incredibly important and influential show. It also had poor toy sales. And after Ideon were 82's Zabungle and 83's Danbine, neither of which were good at advertising Clover's toys. In fact, Clover would go out of business during Danbine's run. Bandai took over sponsorship of the latter show because Danbine moved a ton of toys, so long as those toys were plastic model kits. Bandai is still in business today, if you were curious. They bought Sunrise in 1993. Something I like to do when watching older shows is track what else was airing at the time, what was trending among different shows, and from that, try and chart out how shows were influenced by each other. For Yusha Writing, Combatler, and Voltes, that's not too hard to do because they are very genre media whose impact is mostly localized within that genre. For Zambot 3, it becomes more difficult. Its most clear influence is being a trial run or an early take on ideas which have become prominent in Mobile Suit Gundam and Space Runaway Ideon, and both of those shows would help dictate the following decade of the medium. So there is some temptation to say something like, the entire anime industry followed Zambot 3, but that's not quite correct. The show was a success and was well regarded, but it was not the phenomenon its successors became. In fact, part of its modern reputation comes from its second airing in 1982, which followed Gundam's own successful rebroadcast. There's a kind of Ouroboros situation where it's partly as popular and influential as it is because the shows that followed it were themselves popular and influential. It might be more sensible to think of Zambot 3 as a part of and a product of a change in audience interest. The wealth of kids' super robot shows that had populated the airwaves had reached oversaturation. Japan had 4 super robot shows airing in 1975, 7 in 76, 6 in 77, and were dropped to 3 and 2 respectively in 78 and 79. Zambot 3's release in October of 77 was right on the crest of this decline in popularity. Having a giant, friendly robot piloted by a heroic teen was no longer a novelty. By being experimental with the formula, or perhaps by being just as bored of it as their audience, Kill 'Em All Tomino and his team were ahead of the curve. Supporting this thought is how the big anime event of 1977 was the release of the Space Battleship Yamato movie. It similarly had an unexpectedly high teenage audience and would lead producers and animators to reevaluate the teenage and young adult audience in the coming years. The times, they were a-changin'. But to pull back a little, Zambot 3 was not only a product of its time, and it did cast a shadow onto later super robot shows. It showed that the genre could permit more serious and more tragic storytelling, and likewise pushed children piloting robots to become something shows had to actively address. The early 80s are filled with super robot shows like Baldios and God Mars, where the pilots are actively miserable. That can be a little over melodramatic, but they are shows where the good guys don't automatically win, and that can be thrilling. That arguably became the default for the genre for several years, up until the next big change in 1984 with the Hasbro-Takara co-production, Transformers. A sad part about becoming a fan of something niche is learning to couch your enthusiasm. Weird genre stuff, cult classics, and other niche art often have atypical strengths that can make it hard to articulate their appeal. Fans, myself included, tend to be forthcoming with qualifiers and caveats to make it clear that whichever movie or book or show isn't good in the normal way. This is not to say that they are so bad they're good, or far more cynically, that they are bad on purpose, but rather they are good in ways we might not expect or be accustomed to recognizing. Niche art often has very remarkable strengths, but perhaps unfashionable ones. Zambot 3 is a show I stumble on because beyond being a very weird show in the 70s science fiction way and a very difficult show, what with the horrors, it's also just regular good. So, is it any good? Yes, unreservedly. It's not beyond criticism, and please note the content warnings, but sure, the show is fantastic. It's a hard series to watch, in like a practical and material sense. Zambot 3 has not had a Western release. There are no English language Blu-rays to buy, and it's not on any streaming services. The fan translation dates to 2008, and it is not perfect. You can find a newer release with higher definition scans, but its subtitles are ripped from the 08 version and ripped imperfectly. As good as it looks in high definition, you might be better off sticking with the older copies if you can find them. It's a shame. As much as I love the wealth of retro super robot anime that's been made available in the West recently, Zambot 3, in this humble man's personal opinion, is more worthy than some of what we've gotten. It's a tight 23-episode series where most everything comes together. It makes the unexpected choice to have the denouement not be a heroic victory, but an emotional catharsis. It makes a lot of other shows, even more modern or better animated shows, look worse by comparison. I would like to end this video by reiterating some earlier advice. If it's episode 11 and you and your super robot find yourselves inside the enemy mothership, just fucking kill them.